Hello and welcome to True Crime Diaries. I'm Emre, and before we dive into today's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our future stories. Today's story is about one of America's most notorious serial killers, Jeffrey Dahmer. Known for his gruesome crimes, Dahmer has become an infamous figure in the dark history of criminal psychology. Strap in as we unravel the disturbing timeline of his acts. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in the bustling city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, nestled in the heart of the American Midwest. To those on the outside, the early life of the young boy appeared, at first glance, to be relatively unremarkable. As the firstborn son to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer, Jeffrey's formative years should have been filled with the simple joys and carefree adventures that typically accompany childhood. However, under the surface, subtle but significant undercurrents hinted at something profoundly darker within Jeffrey, foreshadowing the deeply unsettling path he would ultimately tread. From a tender age, Jeffrey exhibited behaviors that, in retrospect, could be seen as warning signs. He was an unusually timid child, often withdrawn, shying away from the playful, exuberant energy that characterized his peers. This quiet demeanor, mixed with an apparent indifference to the world around him, set young Jeffrey apart. Such apathy could be noted even during moments that should have provoked both emotional and empathetic responses. The Dahmer household, despite outward appearances, was no stranger to turmoil. Lionel and Joyce's marriage was fraught with tension, their frequent arguments creating an atmosphere of instability and unpredictability, a backdrop that profoundly impacted Jeffrey. The discord between his parents escalated over time, culminating in their eventual divorce. This fracturing of his family was a pivotal moment for Jeffrey, further deepening his sense of isolation and alienation. As the family unit disintegrated, Jeffrey found himself grappling with feelings of abandonment and neglect, emotions that he perhaps could not fully understand or articulate. Left to navigate his formative years without the steady anchor of a nurturing and unified home, Jeffrey began to retreat into his own world, one that grew increasingly macabre. By his teenage years, a troubling fascination began to emerge, a burgeoning curiosity with death. Jeffrey's interest in the morbid crystallized around a peculiar hobby, the collection and preservation of dead animals. His presnafe. Roadkill became his peculiar treasure, meticulously gathered and examined. He catalogued these findings with a detached curiosity that baffled those who later discovered this unsettling pastime. Could these early obsessions have been cries for help? Signals that something was deeply amiss in his psyche. A cry perhaps unnoticed in the chaos and dysfunction surrounding him. As we delve deeper into these formative moments, one cannot help but wonder, what if the environment in which Jeffrey grew had been more nurturing? What if the threads of his early narrative had woven together differently, offering support and intervention at critical junctures? Would the darkness within have been quelled? Or was it an inevitable emergence, regardless of circumstance? Such questions linger, casting long shadows as we continue to explore the profound implications of Jeffrey Dahmer's early years, a phase of life that indelibly shaped one of the most infamous figures in true crime history. The initiation of Jeffrey Dahmer's horrific journey into the depths of criminal depravity began almost inconspicuously on June 18, 1978, a mere 3 weeks after his high school graduation, a time typically earmarked with dreams and ambitions. Dahmer shockingly veered into the darkness. In that fateful summer, an 18-year-old hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks unknowingly crossed paths with a grim fate. Dahmer spotted Hicks, extending to him a friendly invitation, a casual gathering over a few beers. The pretext was companionship, a seemingly simple act of camaraderie devoid of any sinister intentions. Yet, beneath this benign demeanor, a monstrous intent lay in wait. As they entered Dahmer's abode, the unsuspecting Hicks could not have predicted the nightmare that was about to unfold. The environment, initially filled with the promise of light-hearted company, swiftly transformed into a scene of unfathomable violence. Dahmer, overcome by urges he would fail to comprehend or control, resorted to violence with a brutally efficient weapon, a dumbbell. This sudden act of bludgeoning was not a moment of madness, but a cold, calculated move. As the life ebbed away from Hicks, Dahmer silenced him permanently through strangulation. This murder, shocking in its brutality, marked just the inception of a series of heinous acts that Dahmer would go on to commit. Following the grim act, the aftermath revealed another facet of Dahmer's depravity. He methodically dissected Hicks' body, commencing a macabre ritual that would unfortunately become all too familiar. After this grisly act, Dahmer sought to conceal the crime by burying the remains in his backyard, a place meant to nurture life, now serving as a harbinger of death. This act of concealment suggested a deeper, evolving understanding of his actions. More than just a hideous impulse, it was a deliberate attempt to erase traces of his guilt. Compellingly, we must consider the psychological battle, if any, that Dahmer faced during this pivotal moment. Was there a flicker of remorse that tried to surface as he took Hicks's life? Did a part of him grapple with the heinous act he had committed over as well? Or, worryingly, had his conscience already retreated, paving the way for a desensitized and guiltless path? The lack of outward hesitation raises questions about the state of his moral compass at this point. A compass that should ideally tilt towards empathy and compassion. This initial killing session revealed much about Dahmer's nascent modus operandi, a chilling blueprint for future crimes. But it also exposed the sheer depths of his moral unraveling. This murder was tragically just the starting thread in what would become an intricate and unsettling tapestry of crime. As we delve further into this story, one must ponder the psychological warfare beneath these acts. Was Dahmer aware of the line he crossed? Or was his trajectory lost amidst the shadows of his fractured psyche? The line between man and monster, during that sweltering June day, blurred ominously, setting the stage for a period marked by unthinkable horror. In 1979, Jeffrey Dahmer made a decision that many hoped would steer him onto a better path. He enlisted in the U.S. Army. This next chapter in his life would take him far from his troubled beginnings in Ohio and place him in an entirely different realm, both geographically and in terms of discipline. Dahmer was stationed in Germany, serving as a medic, a role that, on paper, seemed to fit him well. This new environment offered a structure and order that his life desperately lacked. However, beneath the surface, the demons that haunted him were far from exorcised. At first glance, the military was an unlikely setting for someone like Dahmer, whose life had been marred by inner turmoil and deviant interests. Yet it was this very environment that offered a curious sanctuary. Under the regimented schedule and strict supervision, one might expect that the disturbing tendencies Dahmer exhibited previously would be suppressed. Indeed, during his service, there were no recorded or reported criminal activities of the horrific nature that Dahmer would later confess to. This suggests whether the military's stringent regimen may have temporarily overpowered his darker impulses. However, the peace was superficial. Dahmer's inner battles manifested through behaviors that couldn't hide beneath the uniform. He grappled with severe alcohol abuse, a problem that had followed him into the service. His performance as a medic began to falter, his reliability called into question as his colleagues noted his frequent intoxication. This personal neglect and deterioration of duty pointed to a deeper struggle. The military environment did not cure him, but merely obscured his issues under layers of discipline and protocol. As the months in service dragged on, it became clear that the Army's rigid framework could only hold Dahmer's erratic behavior at bay for so long. The disturbing elements of his psyche that defined his early crimes lay dormant, not eradicated. In early 1981, these unresolved issues culminated in Dahmer's discharge. Officially, he was deemed unsuitable for military service, his dependence on alcohol and failure to uphold his duties no longer tolerable. This discharge stirs curious introspection. Was it the pressure of military life that exacerbated his tendencies, or was this specific setting still not equipped to address the core of Dahmer's pathology? His time in the Army, seemingly a hiatus from his prior misdeeds, raises unsettling thoughts about whether discipline alone can temper a tempest within. As Dahmer exited the military, it became alarmingly clear that the brief reprieve was positioned on fragile grounds. The question loomed: outside this structured existence, would his darker nature resurface more domineering than before, or would he forge a new path? As Jeffrey Dahmer settled into Milwaukee in 1985, the shadows of his hidden darkness grew bolder. It was here that Dahmer's insidious predilections took root, evolving into a spree that would ultimately become one of the most notorious killing rampages in American history. His methods, refined through cold and calculating experimentation, became a chilling ritual of seduction, restraint, and murder. Each encounter with a victim unfolded a meticulous process, beginning with luring them into a false sense of safety, often in bars or clubs, before giving them drug-laced drinks that rendered them powerless. Once under his control, Dahmer's ritual unfolded in malevolent secrecy. What began as a grotesque dance of death quickly turned into acts of stripping dignity away, both physically and emotionally. His twisted need extended beyond taking their lives. It was the control, the silence he could impose, and the complete dominance over another human being that drove him further into the abyss of his own dark desires. The ultimate goal wasn't merely the act of killing, but the possession of another's essence, expressed through the macabre trophies he collected. Skulls and organs, mementos of his gruesome conquests, were preserved with care, each a haunting testament to the lives he coldly extinguished. This sequence of grim events occurred unnoticed, a terrifying testament to Dahmer's disturbingly meticulous nature. Even as the numbers climbed to over a dozen young men presumed lost in the shadows, Dahmer managed to weave his narrative under the radar. Was it simply the fragmented nature of these communities, often marginalized and ignored, that allowed Dahmer to operate unimpeded? Or was his terrifying prowess in manipulation and deceit powerful enough to eclipse the suspicions that might have arisen? It is at this point in Dahmer's story that we are compelled to speculate. What truly fueled the fire within him, this power signed? Was it the heinous thrill that came with each kill, the living embodiments of his deep-seated fantasies? Or was it something even more sinister? Perhaps the allure lay in the psychological battle he waged, not with his victims, but with an invisible adversary. The police, society, or even the very barriers of his psyche that knew his actions were abominable. Dahmer operated in an era where young men vanishing was too easily overlooked, creating a playground for his perversions. The voids left in the wake of each disappearance should have painted a portrait of horror, yet instead, Dahmer artfully evaded capture with a calm demeanor and an unsettling knack for evading detection, skirting ever closer to the brink of being caught. With each eluded capture, as news of these vanishings barely rippled, Dahmer's confidence and his depravity concurrently deepened. It leaves us to wonder, if more eyes had turned toward the shadows sooner, might the dark fairy tale of Jeffrey Dahmer have been cut short before it reached such monstrous proportions? In contemplating the chilling echoes of his darkest deeds, we are left in awe and alarm at how intricately Dahmer wound his web of horror, and how easily society allowed it to weave unnoticed, until it was far too late. By the late 1980s, the terrifying saga of Jeffrey Dahmer took a chilling turn. His methods, already brutally violent, became even more deranged and ritualistic, redefining the boundaries of horror. Dahmer's dark descent is marked by an unsettling blend of necrophilia and cannibalism, acts driven by his twisted longing for control and possession. This period witnessed Dahmer pushing his macabre fantasies to new extremes, where his need to dominate went beyond mere physical violation. In those years, Dahmer's infamous experiments with creating zombie-like submissive partners showcased his grotesque creativity in the realm of cruelty. He attempted to strip his victims of autonomy by drilling into their skulls and injecting acid directly into their brains, hoping to induce a compliant, non-threatening state. These acts weren't just manifestations of his violent urges, but pointed to a mind that had drifted far from any semblance of empathy or humanity. The chilling silence of his apartment told tales of these unspeakable horrors as each victim became a step deeper into an abyss of madness. There's a haunting question that lingers in the air. Was Dahmer spiraling out of control, losing his tenuous grip on normalcy with each escalating act of brutality? Or perhaps more terrifyingly, did he view these acts as the zenith of his twisted quest for dominion? As we delve deeper into his psyche, it's hard not to wonder how he perceived these ghastly acts. Were they desperate attempts to fulfill a fantasy that constantly eluded him, or calculated steps toward creating a reality in which he was the sole arbiter of life and death? The timeline of these events reveals a pattern of increasing audacity. Deafness. Dahmer moved with a peculiar caution mixed with reckless abandon. Living in a bustling neighborhood, in an apartment filled with neighbors who occasionally caught whiffs of foul odors and disturbing noises, Dahmer continued his horrific practices. These escalating acts weren't done in isolation. They were set against the backdrop of a life outwardly perceived as mundane, yet teeming with hidden atrocities. As we piece together his grim escalation, we must consider the cold precision and twisted determination that drove him. How did Dahmer rationalize his abominable experiments to himself? In those moments, in the dark confines of his apartment, was there any pause, any fleeting moment of realization of the monstrosity of his actions? Or did he simply revel in the grotesque sense of power he believed he wielded? Each chilling detail unearths more questions about his mindset, driving home the terrifying unpredictability of a man living on the edge of an unfathomable darkness. As we navigate this disturbing chapter, we're left in uneasy contemplation of how such atrocities could unfold right under the world's oblivious gaze. On a humid July evening in 1991, an encounter edged with sheer horror set the stage for what would become the unprecedented unraveling of a true nightmare. Tracy Edwards, seeking nothing more than casual company, found himself in what initially seemed like just another apartment. Little did he know, he was stepping into the den of one of America's most notorious serial killers. As dusk settled over Milwaukee, the unassuming beige apartment complex unwittingly concealed chilling truths within its walls. Upon entering Jeffrey Dahmer's residence, Tracy was initially lulled into a false sense of normalcy, but the atmosphere quickly turned sinister. Dahmer, with his peculiar charm, began to reveal his darker inclinations, snapping chains of trust with jarring abruptness. It became a desperate night in which Tracy's survival instincts kicked into high gear. In a miraculous moment of courage and clarity, Tracy seized an opportunity to escape the apartment, fleeing into the night, his heart racing as fast as his feet. Once on the street, Tracy's panic was palpable. Desperately, he flagged down 2 Milwaukee police officers, peeling back the curtain on a world that few could have comprehended. The officers, initially skeptical but swayed by the fear in Tracy's eyes and his compelling story, reluctantly agreed to investigate further. They were led back to Dahmer's grim apartment, unwittingly about to uncover one of the darkest chapters in criminal history. Stepping into the apartment, a miasma of decay and desolation greeted them. Their gaze was drawn, almost magnetically, to a stack of Polaroid photographs casually strewn about, each capturing grotesque and unfathomable scenes of human dismemberment. These photographs would prove to be the pivotal key, prompting an immediate and urgent arrest of Dahmer. The realization of having captured such an infamous figure gripped not only the officers, but the entire nation, as the full spectrum of Dahmer's atrocities came to light. 17 lives, each story more haunting than the last, were put to rest as Dahmer's gruesome confessions filled the airwaves, shocking a nation and capturing every headline. Communities were frantic, yet somehow relieved, as the terrifying specter that had loomed large over Milwaukee was finally laid to rest. But even as the sound of the cell door closing resonated, larger questions lingered in the minds of many. Was Dahmer a product of pure, intrinsic malevolence, a mind warped beyond redemption from its very inception? Or were there moments, flickers of intervention opportunities that society missed, paths untaken that could have veered him away from this macabre destiny? His capture, though a momentous relief, opened the floor to unsettling possibilities and what-ifs, leaving a murmur of introspection in its wake. As we delve deeper into Dahmer's psychological landscape, these questions crescendo, urging us to sift through the shadows for missed signs and second chances lost. Jeffrey Dahmer's trial commenced on January 30, 1992, a significant moment that drew tremendous public attention, transforming the courtroom into a grand stage for one of the most haunting legal dramas of the decade. As Dahmer sat before a Milwaukee County jury, the gravity of his actions rattled the nation. He stood accused of a scale of brutality seldom witnessed, with 15 counts of murder underscoring the sinister depths of his spree. His crimes, grotesque and methodically executed, had left an indelible scar on families and communities, further igniting a fierce debate on the nature of evil and justice. The trial unfolded, with the defense team presenting a plea of guilty but insisting on Dahmer's insanity, a defense mechanism suggesting that while he committed the crimes, his mental state was so impaired he should not be fully held accountable. This argument pushed the boundary of legal and psychological discourse, sparking widespread public and judicial speculations about the state of sanity and responsibility. Could the chilling calmness with which Dahmer recounted his acts be attributed solely to madness, or was it indicative of a more profound and sinister pathology? As the testimonies were unveiled, the courtroom became a battleground for understanding the human psyche's darkest corners, stirring both curiosity and horror. Psychiatrists took the stand, delving into analyses that painted Dahmer as a man ensnared in his derangement, yet equally cognizant of his monstrous actions. This clash of views raised unsettling questions. When confronted with such unprecedented depravity, does our legal system have the means to appropriately gauge accountability? How do we balance the scales of justice for someone whose crimes transcend conventional understanding? Public discourse swirled around these questions, growing more fervent with every revelation. Many debated if a serial killer like Dahmer could ever be truly understood or fit within the existing molds of psychological analysis. Despite complex arguments, the jury's decision reverberated unequivocally through the legal corridors. Dahmer was not madness personified, but a remorseless murderer competent enough to face the full weight of the law. As the verdict was read, 15 consecutive life sentences were handed down, ensuring that Dahmer would spend the remainder of his life in confinement, offering a somber conclusion to an already grim tale. The trial's aftermath rippled far beyond the sentences imposed, prompting a societal reckoning with the justice system's approach to individuals who commit acts of terror on such horrifying scales. It left many pondering, have we, as a society, truly grasped the limits of human morality, and is our system equipped to deliver justice to those who seemingly operate outside them? These questions lingered, casting a shadow over the concept of justice itself, amidst one of history's most disturbing criminal narratives. On the morning of November 28, 1994, the everyday routine of the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, shattered with the news that the notorious serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer had been found dead in a prison bathroom. Bayfor. The man responsible for ending Dahmer's life was fellow inmate Christopher Scarver, who attacked him with a metal bar while they were on a work detail, assigning an abrupt and violent conclusion to the story of one of America's most infamous criminals. As word spread about his murder, it elicited a torrent of mixed emotions across the globe. For some of the families of Dahmer's victims, his death was met with a muted sense of relief, a finality to the torment and the media frenzy that surrounded his trial and incarceration. However, others were left grappling with an unfulfilled longing for deeper understanding and closure. They hoped for revelations from Dahmer himself to make sense of the incomprehensible. The circumstances surrounding Dahmer's death raised a few eyebrows. How was it possible for such a high-profile inmate with a history of heinous crimes and mental health issues to be left vulnerable at times? Although some theories suggest it was an inevitable outcome of prison dynamics, whispers of conspiracy lingered, fueled by the notion that some saw his death as an easy escape from the specter of his crimes. Jeffrey Dahmer's legacy remains hauntingly complex. His gruesome acts of murder, cannibalism, and necrophilia are studied in the landscape of criminology as a profound example of extreme deviance. Yet, his actions provide chilling insight into the psychiatric aspects of serial killers, challenging experts to unravel the intricate web of psychological disturbances and environmental factors that contributed to his notorious path. Dahmer has frequently been referenced in discussions about prison safety and the management of dangerous inmates, igniting debates on whether the justice system adequately protects its charges from retribution and harm behind bars. His story is a lightning rod for discussions, shedding light on the failings and challenges of mental health treatment and criminal rehabilitation. The monstrous nature of his crimes ensures that Dahmer remains a fixture in popular culture and media, often bringing uncomfortable questions about humanity's darker impulses to the forefront. As years go by, the enigmatic draw of his narrative compels ongoing reflection and analysis, a sobering reminder of the unpredictable and sinister avenues of human behavior. His life and death closed a chapter in a menacing tale, but left behind a legacy of horror that endures, prompting society to consistently grapple with the depths of evil inherent in human nature. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more true crime stories. Exploring cases like Jeffrey Dahmer's, we aim not only to inform but to reflect and question the very nature of human behavior. Until next time on True Crime Diaries, stay vigilant and empathetic.